This happened last year. I'm a 24-year-old woman. It all started when I decided to sell some things on Craigslist. I had a pretty large collection of books back then. It was well over 200. I dreaded the thought of having them in the event I needed to move, so I put an ad up on Craigslist with about 50 books that I was willing to sell. Within a few hours, I received a message from a woman named Carla. She said she was interested in buying one of them, and asked if she could come by my place to pick it up. I thought it was a little strange, since I prefer to meet in public, but I figured it would save me a slight hassle. I have an apartment on the main floor of an older house. It has a front and back door that are both mine. There are two large windows at the front, and it's surrounded by a wire fence. When Carla arrived at my house, she seemed friendly. She was around my age, and she was wearing a black hoodie. She had her long dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. She said she was in a hurry, and asked if she could just grab the book and go. I didn't think anything of it at the time, so I handed it over, and watched as she went back to her car, and drove away. The next day, I received another message from Carla. This time she was interested in buying a few more of them, and she asked me if she could come by my house again to pick them up. I thought it was strange that she wanted to come back so soon. She could have taken as many as she wanted before. It's not like they were expensive. I was selling them for around $5 each. When Carla arrived at my house again, something felt off. She seemed nervous and jittery. She kept looking over her shoulder, like she was afraid of being followed. I asked her if everything was okay, but she just brushed it off and said she was in a hurry. The books she wanted were on a small table that I keep next to the front door. I walked over to get them, but when I turned back around, Carla was standing in the doorway, inside my house. She was shaking, and she had an intense look on her face. She was breathing heavily, looking right at me. "Are you okay?" I asked. She didn't answer, but she took a step towards me. That's when I got scared. I felt very threatened. I knew I couldn't let her come near me. I thought I was about to get stabbed or something. I told her to stay back, but she kept coming. I ran down the hallway and locked myself in the bathroom. While I was in there, I could hear Carla tearing through my apartment. I knew I was being robbed, but there was nothing I could do about it. I called the police right away. I told them that I was hiding in the bathroom and that I was currently being robbed. The operator told me that someone would be there within a few minutes. It seemed like a long wait. By the time the police got there, Carla was gone, and my apartment was a disaster. Every drawer was on the floor, and some of my things were broken. I didn't have much expensive stuff, but she took my TV and some money that I had on my dresser. I think it was around $50. Carla and I had only communicated through email, so there was no way to track her. I didn't even know her real name. Probably wasn't even Carla. Fast forward to a week later. I was on Craigslist just looking around. On a whim, I searched for a TV. Mine had been stolen, and I thought it would be crazy if Carla posted it there for sale. I could hardly believe it, but my TV was there on Craigslist, posted the day after I was robbed. I was sure it was mine, because there was a small dent in the side that I knew was there. I called the police again. They set up a small sting operation and managed to arrest Carla. I got my TV back, but more importantly, a dangerous person was taken off the streets. I moved to Seattle about 10 years ago. When I first got there, I had neither a job nor a place to live. It's tough to get an apartment without a job, so even though I had some money saved, I didn't have a lot of options for places to live. I was browsing ads on Craigslist and Facebook, but it was rare to find a place that would rent to me. Eventually I found a room for rent on Craigslist. It was a single room in the basement of a house with a private bathroom. It wasn't cheap, even though it was just a room. I think it was around $800 a month, paid in advance. When I first arrived, I was greeted by the landlord, who showed me around the house. It was an old place with a lot of character. There was no living room, just a shared kitchen and laundry room for common space. There were 3 bedrooms on the main floor, and 2 in the basement. There were 3 other people living there at the time, and they all seemed nice enough at first. There was an older gentleman named George, a young woman named Angela, and a man in his mid-30s named Kirk. I didn't get much of a chance to talk to them, because I was busy settling in and looking for a job. The first few days were not very exciting. I would see the other roommates in passing, but we didn't really interact much. It wasn't until a week into my stay that things started to get weird. I remember coming home one day, and I noticed Kirk was acting strange. He seemed agitated. He was pacing back and forth in the kitchen. When he saw me, he quickly composed himself and greeted me with a smile. That night, I heard strange noises coming from Kirk's room. His room was in the basement near mine. It sounded like he was moving furniture around or something. Looking back, it was definitely a red flag. The next morning, I went to make coffee, and Kirk came in. We didn't talk, but there was some serious tension in the air. I was really creeped out, but I can't explain why. Over the next few days, I started to notice more and more strange behavior from Kirk. He would often come home late at night, and I could hear him muttering to himself in his room. I thought he was on his phone at first, but it didn't seem right. I'm pretty sure he was talking to himself. One night, I woke up to the sound of screaming. It was coming from Angela's room. I quickly got out of bed and ran towards the room, but as I got closer, I could hear Kirk's voice. He was saying something to Angela. I didn't know what to do, so I stayed back and listened. After a few minutes, the screaming stopped and everything went quiet. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I asked Angela what happened. She was visibly shaken and didn't want to talk about it. I knew something was seriously wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but I didn't have any proof that anything was actually happening. I'm still not sure exactly what happened that night. Over the next few days, Kirk seemed to get even worse. He would snap at the slightest thing, and his behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. Around a week later, Kirk stopped coming out of his room completely. I could hear him talking to himself through the door. I was starting to fear for my safety and the safety of the other roommates. It wasn't until a few days later that everything came to a head. I came home from work and found George sitting on the front porch, looking very distressed. He told me that he had gone into Kirk's room to ask him to turn down the music, but he found something very disturbing. There were knives and other sharp objects scattered all over the room, and there was what looked like a large bloodstain on the floor. We called the police and reported what George had found. They arrived and searched the house. They found that Kirk was gone. He must have split as soon as George saw his room. The police did find evidence that he had been planning something terrible, though. The police were able to track Kirk down a few days later. He was arrested and charged. The bloodstain on his floor was traced back to a missing person. In the end, we all moved out of the house and went our separate ways. I still think about what happened there from time to time, and I wonder how I was able to share a house with someone so evil. I graduated from college in 2016. Soon after, I moved to Chicago and started looking for a cheap place to rent in the city. I scoured Craigslist for weeks, sending out countless messages and making phone calls. Most of the places I found were out of my price range. I was just working at a parking lot at the time, trying to find work in my field of study. The money wasn't great, so it was pretty difficult for me to find a place I could afford. But then, one day, I stumbled upon an ad that seemed like a possibility. It was a room for rent in a house with roommates. It didn't look that bad in the pictures, and the price was right. I replied and arranged a viewing with the landlord, a man named Trevor. I wasn't too thrilled about the location. It was in a sketchy neighborhood, but I figured I could tough it out for a while, at least until I saved up enough to move somewhere better. To be honest, it was about what I was expecting. I knew I didn't have a lot of options. As long as the place was decently clean and safe, I wouldn't have complained. On the day of the viewing, I arrived at the address that Trevor had given me. The house looked old and run down, with peeling paint and even a broken window at the front on the top floor. I hesitated, wondering if I should just turn around and leave, but I had come this far and I didn't want to waste my time. Trevor met me at the door. I could tell right away that he was not someone to be messed with. He was a big guy, with tattoos covering both his arms. He had a thick New York accent and a gruff demeanor. I'm not one to judge. I know some great people who have a really intimidating look on the outside, but this guy just gave off a bad vibe. He seemed angry, but I didn't know why. I went in anyway. He led me up the stairs to the room, which smelled like a mixture of mold and stale cigarette smoke. As we walked through the hallway, I noticed that the carpet was stained and frayed, and there were holes in the walls. Trevor opened the door to the room, and I nearly gagged at the sight of it. It was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and dresser. The walls were yellowed with age, and the floor was dirty. The window was broken, and there was a layer of dust on the windowsill. I tried not to show my disgust, but Trevor could tell I wasn't impressed.
"It's not much, but it's better than sleeping on the streets, am I right?"
he said with a chuckle. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to leave right then and there, but I didn't want to be rude. Trevor continued to show me around the apartment, and the rest was not much better. The bathroom was dirty, with a cracked toilet, and a shower that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. The kitchen was a disaster. There were dirty dishes piled up everywhere, and the refrigerator smelled like something had died in it. I was starting to feel sick, but Trevor didn't seem to notice. He was too busy trying to convince me to take the room.
"You won't find a better deal anywhere else in the city. I promise you that,"
he said. I knew he was lying, but I didn't want to argue with him. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I told him I would think about it, and then I headed for the stairs, but he blocked me. He seemed offended, like I had disrespected him. He was really getting in my face and scaring me. I didn't know who he was, or what he was capable of. I'm only 5'6" and not muscular, and this guy was way bigger than me. I kept trying to leave, but he wouldn't let me go. I finally relented and told Trevor that I would take the room. He stepped aside, and I walked down the stairs, trying to seem calm. As soon as I left the building, I felt like I could breathe again. I walked a few blocks away before I finally stopped and pulled out my phone. I stared at Trevor's number on the screen for a few seconds before I realized what I had to do. I deleted his number and never looked back. I knew that I would have to start my search for a place again, but I couldn't bear the thought of living in that dump, and I couldn't allow myself to be intimidated by that guy either. I continued my search, and eventually found an apartment within my budget. It was a small basement bachelor with low ceilings, and a hot plate instead of a real stove. It was clean though, and the neighborhood was safe. I stayed there for a year. By then, I had a decent job, and I was able to afford a nice one-bedroom place. One night, I was on Craigslist browsing for a new lawnmower. My other lawnmower had broken the day before, and my grass hadn't been mowed in a long time, so I decided to check for the best deal. I remember I came across this ad that was selling a lawnmower for only $30. I was surprised, because the lawnmower seemed to be in good condition, and I thought it would last for a while. There was a phone number included in the ad. I texted the number, not wanting to miss my chance to buy it. I received a text back about 5 minutes later. The guy introduced himself as John, and he asked if I was going to buy it. I said yes. He asked me if I could come by the following day at 8 p.m. I told him I could, and he said he would have the lawnmower ready for me. When the time came, I texted him again and asked him for his address. He quickly replied and gave it to me. It was about 10 minutes away from my house. When I reached the destination, I pulled to the side of the road and texted him to let him know I was there. He told me to come through the back door of the house since the front door was broken and wouldn't open. As long as I was getting the lawnmower, my thought was that it was fine. I got out of my car and walked to the house and around to the back. The back door was unlocked, so I could easily get inside. What caught me off guard was that there was not a single light on in the house. I texted John that I was there, and he told me to come into the basement. There was a basement door not too far away from me, and it was slightly cracked open. I was about to go down, but then I thought to myself, why would the lawnmower be in the basement? Immediately, red flags started going off in my head. Then I received a text from John saying that he was waiting for me to come down. It was at this point that I realized there was probably no lawnmower. I didn't stick around any longer though. I rushed outside to my car and drove away. On my way home, my phone started ringing. It was John calling me. He had never called me before. I decided to let it go to voicemail. He called me 2 more times, but I ignored them both as well. When I got home, I saw that John had left a voicemail. I listened to it, and what I heard was downright terrifying. It was John's voice telling me that he had my phone number, and that he would find me and do unspeakable things to me. I instantly blocked the number and called the police. When the police got to my house, I tried calling the number again, but it said that the call couldn't be completed as dialed. I showed the police my voicemail, and they said that I barely escaped a trap. They said there was nothing they could do, but I ended up filing a report anyway. I went to Craigslist to report the ad, but it had been taken down. I guess the guy must have covered his tracks pretty good. Whatever the case may be, I got a new lawnmower, and I never used Craigslist again.